what he's up to. He's picking me like chicken, shucking me like corn, stewing me like an oyster. I mean, he ain't put nothing down.
Dick from the back and make an asshole clap. You ain't never had that. You little bristle. I suck the dick off the gristle and make your asshole whistle. The Andy Griffin theme song all night long. I make you whistle.
Now, the disruptor-in-chief, Elon Musk, who apparently has adopted the alias, at least he changed his social media handle to Harry Balls, tweeted this morning, democracy in America is being destroyed by judicial.
Yo, it's your boy, the Tesla King, Elon Musk. The boys always make my rocket shoot straight up, no homo. You bout to listen to the #1 JFK-related podcast on planet Mars. Now plug in your neural link for two numbnuts who aren't a waste of government spending, the BBB and JOEB.
Here's the BBB&JOEB, and the BBB, baby, BBB&JOEB, rock, cock, and Joe rally. BBB&JOEB, and the BBB, baby, BBB&JOEB, rock, cock, and Joe rally. We're coming in, only seeking the truth about JFK. It's the Long Coming Podcast crew. Tell 'em, Joe, here we go.
And here we go. Muted. Muted.
Okay. Now that I've shook everything in the damn house loose, welcome to episode 336 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. Yes, we are sponsored by Silk City Hot Sauce. And it is delicious. Although sometimes it does choke me up a little bit. Woo! My goodness.
Got a good one there, huh, buddy?
Yeah, bud. This pepper is rocking me. Yeah, it's episode 336. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast. It is Friday night. It is 7 o'clock Eastern. And we are here barely. It's Joe. Before I die live on the air, please welcome everybody in while I recover.
Sure. Well, yes, happy Friday night to everyone. We have a fun show planned out for you today. But first, hello, Bungled. Mr. Alpha 66, Mike. Scott Edwards is ultra ready. Scott's comments are just goated. Paul Cummings, good evening, sir. Saleh, good evening to you. Hell comes to play. Bloody Benders, Lee, good evening, sir. And south to west, Rob might have got dosed before this episode. You never know. Based on his background lighting, you never know. And Colleen's everyone's favorite rocket queen. Hello, Colleen. And let's see. Paula, how are you? I'll trade the Johnson and the Guts guy to get the Aunt Udine back. She was here earlier in the comments. I'm sure she'll be here. You're still muted, Rob. It's been muting you automatically. I see this on my...
I know, brother. I'm still dying over here.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was doing it automatically. Trey. Let's see who else. Tiny Dancer, clocking in at 7:02:57 or 49. Pretty much on schedule. Mr. Jack Taylor, and I'm sure more will come in. And Brandon, one of our newest covert operators, I believe. Good evening to you, sir. Muted. Oh, you're still.
Yeah, I know, Joe.
I wasn't
well
sure.
aware I'm muted. Thank you.
I can't tell if
There's a
you're
reason for
talking.
that.
I can't tell if you're talking.
I am, but I'm just
coughing.
I'm cursing.
I see. It looked like a talk. Okay, that's what threw me off.
Whew, man. Remind me to lay off those last minute bong hits, bro. Good Lord Almighty.
For this episode, it might be appropriate, you know?
Well, I think I'm somewhat back to normal. I hope. Now, when we previewed this episode, Joe, I threw out a little bone to everybody. But I want to reiterate it before we even get started because it's a very interesting nugget or nougat, right? Man, God. Pardon me. Woo. All right, so I came across a document labeled Top Secret CIA Document from December the 1st, 1953. Now, this is way, way back, 10 years before the Kennedy assassination. I know that. Excuse me. But, God damn. It has some very interesting anecdotes in it. And it talks about LSD. This thing's all about LSD. And it's an Inspector General, memorandum for the Inspector General on the use of LSD, as a matter of fact. And it's talking about LSD. And I believe one of Sidney Gottlieb's aliases was Dr. Gibbons. I forget what his first name was supposed to be. But he says, Dr. Gibbons has impounded all LSD material in CIA headquarters in a safe adjacent to his desk. No one else has accommodation to this safe. The material was so impounded on 29 November 1953. Dr. Gibbons stated that he is stopping any LSD tests which may have been instituted or contemplated under CIA auspices. A cable will be sent to the field on December the 1st, 1953 to reflect this effect. Only 2 field stations. Now, this is what caught my attention, folks. 2 field stations. There's a reason. Manila and Atsugi have LSD material. There is none in Germany, although Mr. William Harvey recently expressed an interest in the subject. Of course he did.
West Germany, that would be.
A cable to the field on December 1st, 1953 will instruct the field as to non-use and request data as to how much is on hand and who has custody and access. Now, the reason Manila and Atsugi caught my attention is because those are 2 places that Oswald went when he was in the Marine Corps just a mere 5 years before this memorandum was written. So Atsugi had LSD. Manila had LSD. That's the Philippines. And it's interesting that Oswald was in both places. Now, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they gave him LSD. But when you're talking about the secret experiments that the CIA was doing and using LSD for, I'm sure over the years, some people have speculated that, maybe Oswald was coerced into, doing certain things. It's possible. There's been talk over the years of programmed assassins, Manchurian candidates, call them what you will. And we know all this. It's a very far-fetched idea, but how far-fetched is it really? And I just thought that was interesting. And the whole reason that this memo came out, Joe, excuse me. Let's see, where was it? Now, is the CIA has furnished a limited quantity of LSD to Mr. George White, Chief of New York District Narcotics Division, Treasury Department. Dr. Gibbons does not know the exact amount in Mr. White's possession. White is fully cleared, according to Dr. Gottlieb or Dr. Gibbons. Which brings us to, I believe, Mr. George Hunter White is an important figure in some of the story lore involving the history of MKUltra and mind control in the CIA. So, Joe, why don't you get us kicked off on that while I still die over here slowly?
Sure. Into George Hunter White, or do you want me to get to the history?
No, just start wherever you want, man.
All right, cool. Well, all right. I'm going to start at the beginning, and we'll get back into George Hunter White because he has some very interesting connections here. But essentially, MKUltra did not start as MKUltra. It started as Project Bluebird in 1949, and Project Bluebird was the first structured, comprehensive, integrated CIA mind control project involving both domestic and overseas covert activities designed to study enemy techniques and test them on selected individuals, including potential intelligence agents, defectors, interesting, refugees, prisoners of war, and, quote, others. Under this early program, experimental psychoactive drugs and hypnosis were used. The objective was to prevent secret information from being extracted from CIA agents. A CIA document indicated that Bluebird material was not fit for public consumption. And so Project Bluebird kind of morphed into Project Artichoke, which was also in operation similar to that, which was developed and enacted by the United States CIA for the purpose of researching methods of interrogation. And Artichoke arose in August 1951 and was operated by the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence. The primary goal of Project Artichoke was to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination. Again, interesting. The project also studied the effects of mind control and hypnosis, forced addiction, and subsequent withdrawal from morphine, other chemicals, including LSD, to produce amnesia and other vulnerable states in victims. That is not fun. And so Artichoke gathered information together with intelligence divisions of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and FBI. And in addition to the scope of the project, the memo dated 1952 January asked, quote, "Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against his fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation?" So really kind of lays out very clearly what the goals of this program were, and it's fitting that it said not fit for consumption. So I'm going to bring up that one document now, and this is that one from 1952. And again, Bluebird and Artichoke kind of morphed into each other. And I'm just going to read a couple sentences from this. For the past several months, subject, signed special research, Bluebird. General problem. For the past several months, Bluebird has been endeavoring to ascertain by research, study, instruction, and some practice what value, if any, can be derived from mind control techniques when applied. They use some acronyms there, SI and H. I think the H is hypnosis. When applied to war and specific agency problems. These broad problems using these techniques may be classified as follows. Can accurate information be obtained from willing or unwilling individuals? Can agency personnel or persons of interest to this agency, in quotations, be conditioned to prevent any outside power from obtaining information from them by any known means? Can we obtain control of the future activities, physical and mental, in quotations, of any given individual, willing or unwilling, by application of these techniques? Can we prevent any outside power from gaining control of future activities, physical and mental, of agency personnel by any known means? Through internal agency channels, Bluebird was given the name of, I think this is Artichoke, but it's redacted, And it goes on to say kind of more of the same. Bluebird officers were unable to find any indications of deviousness of pro-Soviet interests during these observations. All right, let's go a little further. And so this is the specific problems in relation to Bluebird. Set out below are specific problems which can only be resolved by experiment, testing, research as proposed in the paragraphs above. These are not in any sense all the problems, but merely typical and point up the need for practical research. Can we, quote, condition, end quote, any suspect or on agency employees or persons of interest to prevent them from giving information to other unauthorized sources? Can we, in a matter of an hour, 2 hours, 1 day, etc., induce hypnosis condition in an unwilling subject to such an extent that he will perform an act for our benefit? Long range, right? Long-term goal there. It's not going to happen immediately. Can we create post-control of any action contrary to an individual's basic moral principles? And can we seize a subject and in the space of an hour or two of hypnosis, have him crash an airplane, wreck a train, etc.? So I thought that was really interesting in terms of the Bluebird document. So that's how it started, artichoke, and then it went into MKUltra in early 1953. Are you still alive on me there, Rob?
No, I'm alive. Although my stupid camera is not.
Yeah.
Yes. Fucking thing, I swear. We
Well,
can go through.
It's okay. So I'll just read one more quick thing. At the end of 1952, as the CIA was rounding up experts to conduct project research for Project Artichoke, one of the locations to the top of their list was Air Force Base Lackland in San Antonio. The reason they were drawn to Lackland was likely twofold. It was where incoming trainees were psychiatrically screened, where questionable Air Force candidates and pre-flight candidates were more evaluated. Second, the new chief of the psychiatric service had arrived in Lackland Air Force Base in 1952, and his name, Rob, was Jolyon West. And he had just completed his residency in New York City and found himself on this Air Force base that was the center of a lot of questionable experiments. And he would go on to head the Human Ecology Fund, which funded MKUltra and co-authored a bunch of comprehensive reports on communist interrogations and indoctrination methods, aka brainwashing. So that's kind of and I'll get into a little of MKUltra and how it was found after, or I could do it now.
And let me just jump in and say that, a lot of these early testings were done without the subject's knowledge. Prisoners, military people, people that are deemed to be expendable. It wasn't like,
prisoners.
Yeah, it wasn't like they were doing all this above board. It was bad stuff, and
people who couldn't complain or who wouldn't be listened if they would.
Yeah, and in the case of military people, they do what they're told by the government. If they're going to slip some LSD into your mashed potatoes at dinner, and you really have no say in the deal, you know what I'm saying? So neither do the prisoners. And there was something really bad that happened at Lackland. I think Joe will get into here in a minute. So
yeah. Let's see. I think the first incident here, even before that incident at Lackland, was of course, an incident I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with, and that happened in 1953, and that was the death of Dr. Frank Olson.
Yeah, and the likely cause of this memo that I just read from the CIA
Was because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the start of this these projects and operations didn't go well, and when the church committee ended up looking into this incident um, in the mid 70s, they came up with a pretty definitive summary of what happened, and I'm going to read a page or two from it here now on Dr. Frank Olson, and it has to, and this is official church committee, book one of their results here.
Yeah. Before you do, Joe, let me just jump in.
Yeah.
And like I said, the memo that I read here is basically calling for an all stop on the CIA directly, overtly using LSD or testing it. And they didn't stop, but they started using cutouts, kind of like they used the mafia to try to kill Castro.
Right.
So they couldn't be directly implicated. They used cutouts like George White and Jolyon West and many, many others to carry out the LSD testing, the mind control testing.
Yes, the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic.
Yeah, so that a lot of this stuff couldn't come back and bite them directly. But yeah, this didn't stop just because this memo went out.
Yes.
It just means that the CIA directly stopped overtly their own testing and then kind of farmed it out, as we'll see.
Yeah, and that's a good point with the kind of Bad Pigs analogy, because it's kind of the same thing. It's from the same playbook, right?
Right.
It makes
Yeah,
a lot of sense.
why should we do it? We can have these scafoozles do it.
Yeah,
Give it back to us.
exactly.
We'll give them the LSD, and then they can do all the heavy lifting and then report back, and we'll pay them an exorbitant amount of money to do so.
Yeah,
as we'll find out as well. So,
yes, sir. So yeah, this is a little snippet here from the church committee, book one, a summary findings, whatever it's called. The death of Dr. Frank Olson. The most tragic result of the testing of LSD by the CIA was the death of Dr. Frank Olson, a civilian employee of the Army who died on November 27th, 1953. His death followed his participation in a CIA experiment with LSD. As part of this experiment, Olson unwittingly received approximately 70 micrograms of LSD in a glass of Cointreau he drank on November 19th, 53. The drug had been placed in a bottle by a CIA officer, Dr. Robert Lashbrook, as part of an experiment he and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb performed at a meeting of Army and CIA scientists.
quick note, Joe. Hey, Joe, quick note.
Yeah.
The dates. Okay. Frank Olson died on November 27th. Okay. He was dosed on November 19th, 8 days prior to his death. He was dosed so bad, he was still tripping 8 days after they dosed him. He was probably in a bad way, very bad way, very bad trip, no sleep for 8 days at this point. So
that's a good point. And
he was dosed to his gills.
Yeah.
70 micrograms is a shit ton of LSD.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I don't know how much a microgram is, but I think it's more than 70 of those little squares that you'd get at a Grateful Dead concert, like one.
Like
one
a sheet of acid has 100 hits on it. It'd be like eating 7 of those.
Yeah,
I mean,
700.
Gone. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And they're going to go into some of this in the couple in the report here. But it's interesting that they decided to perform this experiment at a meeting of Army and CIA scientists. So all the nerds are getting together. Let's all do acid.
Well,
Sure.
I heard it was something kind of like they went on a little retreat, kind of like in the woods somewhere, and we're hanging out and just kicking it, and yeah, that's when all this went down. So
Yeah, I think it gets into this. Shortly after the experiment, Alston exhibited symptoms of paranoia and schizophrenia, accompanied by, yes, really? Accompanied by Dr. Lashbrook, Olson sought psychiatric assistance in New York City from a physician, Dr. Harold Abramson, whose research on LSD had been funded indirectly by the CIA. While in New York for treatment, Olson fell to his death from a 10th-story window in the Statler Hotel.
And the worst part of this, Joe, is he didn't know that he'd been dosed. It's one thing if you know that you're fucked up, and you're fucked. It's a whole nother thing to not know and just to be all of a sudden thrown into that mental state. Like,
Yes.
and somehow he made a trip, to New York, tripping balls.
Did it happen in New York? Did the conference happen in New York?
Honestly, the way I remember, and it's been such a long time, I thought it happened in Maryland.
Okay. You could be right. That would be safer.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, maybe he saw the doctor in New York. Maybe we'll say it and answer a question in the next page here.
Because Camp Dietrich, as it was known back then, yeah, it was at a cabin. It says right there, Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Yeah.
Yep. So the experiment on November 18th, 1953, a group of 10 scientists from the CIA and Camp Dietrich attended a semi-annual review and analysis conference at a cabin located at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were on a little retreat out in the woods in Maryland.
Yeah. So I guess
he made a trip to New York tripping balls. I don't
well,
know.
I think I don't think he made a trip to New York, Rob. I think they probably
took him.
That guy Abramson, that thing I just read. They said he
fixed this dude.
Yeah, he had been funded indirectly, so I think he had some expertise, which is like, oh God, this guy's screwed up here. We have to take him to this doctor. So,
yeah, I need to give this guy help pronto.
Yeah. Obviously, that help did not work.
No.
According to one CIA official, the Special Operations Division participants agreed that an unwitting experiment would be desirable. This account directly contradicts Vincent Rouet's recollection. Rouet recalls no such discussion and has asserted that he would remember any such discussion, blah, blah, blah. In May 1953, Richard Helms, Assistant Deputy Director of Plans, DDP, held a staff meeting with the Chief of Technical Services staff, which the chief of that staff attended. At this meeting, Helms indicated that the drug LSD was dynamite and that he should be advised at all times when it was intended to be used. In addition,
what's funny about that,
DDP,
I think after Richard Helms became the director, for like 2 years, he didn't even know that MKUltra was a thing. Like they didn't tell him. He never knew, allegedly.
Yeah, I didn't hear that. From what I know and what I'll talk about in a little bit with Gottlieb, it seems like he was kind of in on this from the beginning. And as we'll get to later, he was also the person that destroyed the documents in 1973.
Yeah, exactly.
That were only found by accident. So Gottlieb went ahead with the experiment with, I guess that's implying with Helms' approval, right? Because this was in November, the experiment, and May, Richard Helms held a staff meeting, says, if anything's being used, let me know, right? So that would definitely contradict his not knowing. According to Gottlieb, quote, a very small dose, in quotations, of LSD was placed in a bottle of Cointreau, which was served after dinner on Thursday, November 19th. The drug was placed in a liqueur by his associate. All but 2 of the participants received LSD. So I think that's 8 out of 10. One did not drink and the other had a heart condition. Oh, 6 out of 10. About 20 minutes after that, they finished. Gottlieb informed the other participants that they had received LSD. He might just be saying this for the committee, but that would be shitty either way. If you got 70 micrograms and then Gottlieb walks in and goes, "Hey, by the way, guys."
Yeah. And of course, nobody would know what the hell it is, even if they did tell them. That back then it wouldn't have really meant much to them.
Well, even if they had, you're right. Even if they had even known what vaguely what it was, they would have no idea what they were in for.
No, especially if he's still tripping that bad after 8 days, it wasn't a quote small dose. Yeah. Somebody screwed up with the dropper on that one.
Yeah, well, let's see what Gottlieb has to say about Olson's behavior. Gottlieb stated that, quote, up until the time of the experiment, he observed nothing unusual in Olson's behavior. Once the experiment was underway, Gottlieb recalled that, quote, the drug had a definite effect on the group to the point that they were boisterous and laughing, and they could not continue the meeting or engage in sensible conversation.
Where am I? Look at the stars.
And especially scientists, man, to be a fly on the wall for that one. The meeting continued until about 1 a.m. when the participants retired for the evening. Gottlieb recalled that Olson, among others, complained of wakefulness. No shit, during the night. According to Gottlieb, on Friday morning, aside from some evidence of fatigue, he observed nothing unusual in Olson's actions, conversation, or general behavior. This guy, Rouet, recalls Olson appeared to be agitated at breakfast, but that he did not consider this to be abnormal under the circumstances. The death. Because they could not obtain air transportation for a return trip on Friday night, so they're talking about from New York to back down to Maryland. Yeah. Lashbrook and Olson made reservations for Saturday morning and checked in to the Statler Hilton. Between that time, they checked in and 10 p.m., they watched television, visited the cocktail lounge, where each had 2 martinis and dinner. I think they're talking about Olton. Olton was cheerful and appeared to enjoy the entertainment. He appeared no longer particularly depressed and almost the Dr. Olson I knew prior to the experiment.
And then he had a horrible flashback thanks to the 2 martini.
Yeah, keyword there, almost. Yeah, that's it. That could have redone it. That's true, Rob. Especially with that dose. After dinner, Lashbrook and Olson watched television for about an hour. At 11, Olson suggested they go to bed. Olson then left a call with the hotel operator to wake them in the morning. At approximately 2:30 a.m. Saturday, November 28th, Lashbrook was awakened by a loud crash of glass. In this report on this incident, he stated only that Olson had crashed through the closed window blind and the closed window. Okay, he closed the window blind and he went through the blinds on the window and fell to his death from the 10th floor. Yeah, not a good start to operations when you have an Army scientist jumping out the window there. So yeah. A lot of people speculate, was this a murder or was this a suicide?
Well, Scott's got a good point here. He says he wasn't still tripping, just psychologically damaged. They may have pushed him out the window because he was having more qualms about the program that he was a part of. Quite possible, too.
Well, that brings me right to the question. I was going to say, do you think he was pushed or do you think he fell?
I don't know. I'm not, dude. It can do funny things to you when you can't sleep, man. And lack of sleep is bad, especially compounded with the mental implications of being dosed that without your knowledge that harshly.
Yeah. For sure.
I mean, people would do almost anything to come down. If they can't come down, not that I would know or anything.
Yeah.
No, but you do get that feeling. You would do anything just to be able to stop tripping so hard. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like you just want to get off the roller coaster at some point, and maybe this
Yes.
guy couldn't take it anymore and was just like, all right, fuck it.
Mhm. And the thing about dosing is that you don't control how long it lasts, and you could do some things like smoke or drink and maybe help it out. But if you have 70 micrograms in you, I mean, whatever. So to that guy's comment, Scott's comment, if there was some evidence that he was having moral qualms about the program, and I don't know if there is or isn't, that would affect what I'm about to say next. I'm not sure it's a murder. I can't go that far yet, but I think it's just as likely he jumped out that window. I don't know, but I have no idea. At the end of the day, I'm speculating, yes. But
I mean, it would seem pretty stupid on this other guy's part if he did murder the guy. I mean, he's staying in the same room as him, so
yeah.
I mean, the veil of suspicion is going to come, and I'm sure it was heavily on him. The answer is either, yeah, for some reason this guy jerked him out of bed at 2:30 in the morning and threw him out the window, or this guy has been laying there for 3 hours and can't fall asleep, and he's like, all right, screw it, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
I went off this trip. I am done.
Yeah.
And sayonara.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so definitely not a good start.
Either way, they killed him. Whether it was a suicide or not.
That is a very good point, sir. And before you get into Jolly West, I'm going to talk about an incident really quickly that happened not that long after this incident.
Yeah.
And that is the incident of a man named Jimmy Shaver, who
it directly involves Jolly West. And was it 1954?
Yes, sir. July 4th, 1954.
Okay, so this is the year after. During the year after the CIA put out this memo saying, all right, we're not doing this anymore. And they started farming it out to people like Jolyon West and these psychiatrists. And they said, all right, you guys do your own testing and all of that. We'll supply the product. We'll pay you to do it, and we'll give you subjects. So, Joe, please continue.
Yep. And that's why I wanted to read this really quickly, because it segues perfect into Jolly West. And to your point, it was about 7 months after the previous incident regarding Frank Olson. So on the night of July 4th, 54, San Antonio, Texas, was shaken by the rape and murder of a 3-year-old girl. The man accused of these crimes was Jimmy Shaver, an airman at the nearby Lackland Air Force Base with no criminal record. Shaver claimed to have lost his memory of the incident. The victim, 3-year-old Cher Jo Horton, had disappeared around midnight outside of the Air Force Base, where her parents had left her in the parking lot outside a bar where she played with her brother while the parents had a drink inside.
Great parents, by the way, but didn't deserve for this to happen.
Yeah. Well, if they were at an Air Force bar, like a bar right outside the base,
so you won't leave your 3-year-old in the parking lot while you're in a bar drinking. I don't care where you are.
I'm not making excuses. From what I read earlier, it was a heat wave and they needed a drink to go to bed. Within an hour, the group came upon a car parked next to a gravel pit. Cher's underwear was hanging from one of the car doors. Shaver wandered out of the darkness. He was shirtless, covered in blood and scratches. Making no attempt to escape, he let the search party walk him to the edge of the highway. Bystanders described him as dazed and in a trance-like state. "What's going on here?" he asked. He didn't seem drunk, but he couldn't say where he was, how he got in there, or whose blood was all over him. Meanwhile, the search party found the girl's body in the gravel pit. Her neck was broken, her legs had been torn open, and she had been that bad thing. Hard. Deputies arrested Shaver. 29. At 29, he was recently remarried with 2 children and no history of violence. He had been at the same bar Horton had been abducted from, but he left with a friend who told police that neither of them were drunk, though Shaver had seemed high on something. Before deputies could take Shaver to the county jail, a constable from another precinct arrived with orders from military police to assume custody of Shaver. Investigators interrogated Shaver in the morning. When his wife came to visit, he didn't recognize her. Still tripping balls. He gave his first statement at 10:30 a.m. That wasn't part of the article. Adamant that another man was responsible. He could summon an image of a stranger with blonde hair and tattoos. After the Air Force Marshal returned to the jailhouse, however, Shaver signed a second statement taking full responsibility, even though he didn't remember anything. He reasoned he must have done it. 2 months later, in September, Shaver's memory still hadn't returned. Forget 10 days later. 2 months later, this dude's still tripping. The commander at the base hospital, Colonel Robert Bray, ordered a psychiatric evaluation to be performed by Dr. Louis Jolyon West, the head of psychiatric services at the air base. It fell to West to decide if Shaver had been legally sane at the time of the murder. Shaver spent the next 2 weeks under West's supervision. They returned to the scene of the crime, trying to jog his memory. Interesting. Now, do you think that was for the investigation or for West's experiments? It's hypothetical.
Oh, this is definitely a West experiment.
Yeah. But I'm saying, like, how often do you let a murder suspect, especially a 3-year-old girl, return to the scene to jog the memory, right? It seems like another operation is here. That's going on here.
He wants to observe him and see what happens.
Well, right. That's exactly my point. Later, West hypnotized Shaver and gave him an injection of sodium pentothal or truth serum to see if he could clear his amnesia. While Shaver was under this truth serum, he, according to testimony, recalled the events of that night, confessed to killing Horton. She brought out repressed memories of his cousin, Beth Rainboat, who had SA'd him as a child. Shaver had started drinking at home the night. He had visions of God and whispered to something weird. At the trial, Jolly West made only a minimal effort to exonerate Shaver. The airman was found guilty, though later, through an appeals court, ruled that he had had an unfair trial. Regardless, was convicted again in a retrial in 1958, and on his 33rd birthday was executed by the electric chair. He maintained his innocence the whole time.
Interesting.
Not off to a good start in the 53 and 54, huh?
No.
Of course, it's been going for a couple of years, but maybe when they first took it to the field.
Well, this is very early. I mean, this is 6 months after the CIA was like hands off.
Yeah.
You know, and Dr. Gottlieb was like, okay, let's farm it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then this happens, relatively within 7 months of,
Yeah.
crazy.
So,
and we don't know whether or not this guy Shaver was a patient of Wes before this happened or not.
Oh, okay. So actually, I have an interesting anecdote to that, and it's later in the article. I don't feel like going down and reading it and wasting your time. But Shaver had chronic migraines, and in the trial, his wife said that he entered an experimental program to help his migraines.
Well, there you go.
You jogged my memory there, bro.
That's right.
Yes. Sometimes you're successful. Most of the times not.
It's a difficult task, Joe.
And I can't disagree with that. So insert, a bad situation happens and insert Jolyon West to kind of play cover up as the psychiatrist. And we will see this again later in the episode, Rob, and later in the case with a name that will be familiar to everyone, and he inserted himself into that situation as well.
Yeah. Well, or was he brought there by a certain?
Yeah, that's what inserted by someone. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this guy seems to be in the weirdest places at the weirdest times, involved with some of the weirdest people. So let's see here. So of course, while MKUltra was going on, it was a highly top secret program, and of course, all of this didn't really come out until the early 70s. For the church committee. And then
it was the church committee, the Rockefeller committee, and the Pike report or something. And apparently it took all three of them to uncover this.
Yeah, and the majority of the MKUltra documents were destroyed at the direction of Richard Helms. Of course, the ones that we do have remaining slip through the cracks in different places here and there. And that's why we do have some of the ones that we have, because Dr. West vehemently denied any involvement with the CIA until his dying breath. But after he passed away, he donated all of his papers to
UCLA.
Was it UCLA? Yeah.
I believe it was 200 boxes. Wasn't it, Rob, or something?
Yeah, because he was director of the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute from 69 to 89. So, yeah, that's where all his papers are at. And that's, of course, where what's the guy's name? Tom
O'Neill.
Tom O'Neill got most of the access to these Jolly West papers that nobody had ever seen before. They're not online. You have to actually go there, request these documents to see them. And what he saw there was crazy, Yeah. Hence the big hullabaloo. And if you haven't yet read the book Chaos by Tom O'Neill, I highly recommend it. And his chaos theory, and we'll touch on it tonight a little bit. Also, there was a recent documentary that came out on Netflix about the same thing, and it's a very good documentary. Highly recommend it.
Yeah. Can we touch on that for a second?
Sure.
Documentary, because you gave that to me as homework, and I then gave it to our members on homework on Wednesday night, and I hopefully some of you the members read it or watched it, but that is crazy. I mean, Manson, the thing that stuck out to me on that was Manson gets released from prison, right?
Thanks, John.
Hey, John, thank you so much. Manson gets released from prison. He's on parole. He goes to San Francisco, which, of course, where he meets or where he goes, has interaction with the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. And that's because he was, he had a commune, all these girls, and he went to them for that clinic for their venereal diseases.
Yes. Gotta get some girls cleaned up before I stick it to them.
Yes. And, of course, who was working at that clinic?
Don't want little Charlie to get sick.
Or maybe abortions too at that point. But Jolly West was working at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. He had an office there. And Manson gets arrested half a dozen times in San Francisco on parole.
And turned loose.
Never gets violated for his parole.
Never.
He then moves down to LA, right, where he has he goes to those Shant, whatever it's called, commune thing.
The Spawn
And
Ranch.
yeah, Spawn Ranch. Thank you, sir. And of course, the Tate murders happened. The couple after the next night, and all this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently, the LAPD were investigating the ranch's role in that, but they were raided for a different reason, like a few days later, according to the documentary, and they were arrested for a bunch of Manson and a bunch of the girls for stolen guns, stolen cars, underage girls, and stolen credit cards in Manson's pocket.
Yeah.
Yet still
Not charged.
not violated or charged for violated parole or charged.
Yeah.
So this is a theme here, and what the documentary raises is there something else going on here? Was there someone?
Well, again, Joe, you have to remember, even though Jolyon West was in the hate, this free clinic, he didn't stay there all the time. Okay. Because again, from 1968 to 1988, he was at UCLA, Los Angeles, which puts him back in the proximity of the Manson family at the time of the murders. So,
yeah,
very interesting stuff. But we'll get.
And one more thing.
Yeah.
You know who the prosecutor was in that case, sir?
Yeah, Bugliosi. Helter Skelter, which is a whole bunch of other bullshit.
Right. Well, they tried to say he tried to start a race war, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the official narrative. And then it kind of went to, don't let your kids get on dangerous drugs. Don't let them join communes. Don't let them, quote, march against the war, right? As the hippie movement, that will lead to this. Yeah. So you could see how this is all kind of falling into place into agency priorities, right? So it's a fascinating documentary. I just want to, and it goes into COINTELPRO.
The natural progression of things in the 60s was, it started out the Kool-Aid acid tests, right? In like 64, 65 with Ken Kesey and the bus, and they have these acid test parties, and the Grateful Dead would play at a lot of these parties while they themselves were tripping balls. And of course, all this activity in San Francisco that kind of came together around the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco was very psychedelic based, very LSD centric. I mean, back then, the Grateful Dead was considered, you have Jimi Hendrix there, you have Janis Joplin there, and the list goes on and on. But all these figures were there promoting, anti-war sentiment, free love, drugs, tune in, turn on, drop out mentality. And things had started to get out of hand, I think, is what they realized. So the one way to curb that is to frame this whole Manson thing as an anti to all of what's going on. And it did. It scared a lot of people.
Yeah, an anti-incentive to go to San Francisco, right? Or to California if you're from anywhere else.
Don't let your babies grow up to be hippies, don't smoke weed. And the whole nine. Yeah. Didn't work very well, but
they kind of went the other way on that one.
Yeah, they tried. Yeah. And there's a whole other facet thing that ties into all this. I think Alan wrote his book a long time ago, and it called Program to Kill, which kind of looks at all of these serial killers and whether or not they were programmed not assassins, but programmed to do what they do, as a means of terrorism, and it's a very interesting idea, very interesting book. So check that out if you haven't.
Yeah. And did you hear Manson's voice? Because they had a couple of his songs on there, and he almost scored a record deal. He actually wrote a couple songs. One of them, the Beastie Boys put out, but didn't give him credit.
You mean the Beach Boys?
The Beach Boys, yes.
Not the Beastie Boys.
That's the Beach Boys.
Well, here's a little story I like to tell about 3 bad hippies you know so well. Let's start our way back in history.
Yeah, and it was crazy because you remember we talked about this? I think it was on the Alton Auctioner show, Doris Day. We talked something about her.
Yeah, her son Terry Melcher was one of the ones killed. That's Sharon Tate's house.
No, it wasn't the one killed. He moved out.
Oh, yeah.
It was his house. And I guess Manson had thought he still lived there, which is why he sent the girls and that guy there.
Yeah.
So very interesting stuff. Definitely check out that documentary. So I wanted to get into that before he went to Chaos.
Which goes into another one of Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which is another good book. Where it kind of explores all the post-hippie goings on in Laurel Canyon,
Really?
Yeah, it's very good. With like David Crosby and the Doors and all the kind of crazy stuff that's going on there.
Cool.
All right, so you done there, Joseph?
I am.
Okay. So Jolyon West was, he started off in Oklahoma, moved to Los Angeles, and then he started going back and forth to the hate section of San Francisco. And, he was conducting LSD experiments this entire time. He was corresponding with Sidney Gottlieb, thanks to, finding his letters and in his in his papers. And what's interesting about that, let me see here. Sorry, I got so much shit on this.
Yeah, which kind of confirmed his correspondence with
Yeah,
Gottlieb.
here it is.
Yeah, corresponded his participation.
Gottlieb's replies came on letterheads from Chemrophil Associates, a front company he used to correspond with MKUltra subcontractors. He says, "My good friend," he wrote, "I've been wondering whether your apparent rapid and comprehensive grasp of our problems could possibly be real. You have indeed developed an admirably accurate picture of exactly what we are after, and for this, I am eternally grateful." Gottlieb saluted his new recruit by saying, "We have gained quite an asset in the relationship we are developing with you." West returned the camaraderie, saying, "It makes me very happy to realize that you consider me an asset." He replied, "Surely there is no more vital undertaking conceivable in these times." So he was very happy to be doing what he was asked to do for his country, right?
Yeah.
There's all these crazy stories of him killing a 7,000-pound elephant, in Oklahoma before he moves to LA by giving an overwhelming dose of LSD, roughly 1,435 times the quantity one would have given to a human, to produce for several hours a marked mental disturbance. Not surprisingly, the elephant collapsed in agony minutes later and died. Not hours, minutes. Crazy.
That's what happens when you let scientists, when you give carte blanche to these nerds and be like, do whatever you want.
It says, now, of course, when you're dealing with this type of substance, drug, if you will, one would think that you got to take a little bit of it just to see what all the hubbub is about, right? So West had ingested the mind-altering substance himself, shortly before he killed Tusco, the 7,000-pound elephant, which was the prize of the Oklahoma City Zoo.
Oh, he was dosed when he did that.
Yeah, and was evidently still under its influence at the time he sloshed through the beast's entrails, performing an autopsy that he recorded on film while tripping on LSD. What the actual fuck? Woo! Could you imagine that, Joe?
Doing an autopsy on an elephant while you're tripping that you just dosed the hell out of? No. Even that might be too much for me, even.
Wow. Wow. He later issued a report to advance his discovery that elephants could be killed with LSD to promote use of the drug to cull elephants herds in Africa, despite a bullet doing the exact same thing and probably a lot cheaper. Just saying. Jolly West moved on, changing his base of operations from Oklahoma to L.A. and keeping with intelligence proposals to utilize prisons as experimental laboratories. He drafted a plan to use electric shock and drugs on state inmates in what was called, quote, aversion therapy. In the 1960s, West could also be found at the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco conducting more LSD experiments, this time within the hippie community. A pet project of West's in the late 60s and early 70s was the Center for the Study of the Reduction of Violence. He proposed to establish a, quote, securely fenced center at a remote abandoned Nike missile base in the Santa Monica Mountains, in keeping with earlier plans by the CIA to set up mind control stations off the beaten path where experimentation could be carried out free from such concerns as human rights protests. Ironically, West embarked on a PR campaign to promote himself as a champion of, quote, human rights, an effort that would be comical if not for the bottom line in terms of the human suffering that he was doling out. West
and animal suffering.
Yeah. West's plans for such centers were the subject of hearings by the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary in 1974, chaired by Senator Sam Ervin, whose members were alarmed at reports that West planned to test radical forms of behavior modification, mind-bending drugs, electric shock, implementation of electrodes directly into the brain, and forcible castration with the drug cyproterone acetate. Critics charged that his violent centers would target blacks and Mexicans in the studies. Other sites selected for West's violent centers in California were Vacaville, Camarillo, and Atascadero state hospitals. It has been documented that CIA drug and radiation experiments did take place at Vacaville. And what's interesting here, I believe it was at the Atascadero State Hospital that alleged Zodiac suspect Arthur Lee Allen spent some time in the mid-60s. Just saying. Yet another study that West called for was clearly aimed at intelligence agency application, remote monitoring, and behavioral control. His plan was to use electric shock and other means to remotely control human behavior. So the thought was to remote control human beings, to be able to, by using a series of electric signals or radio waves, be able to control people's movements, and thoughts. Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So between 1974 and 1989, Dr. Jolyon West received at least $5.2 million in grants from the federal government. Now, it doesn't say what he made before this from the government for doing everything he was doing in the 50s and 60s, but 5.2 million in 15 years ain't bad. I'll take it.
Yeah.
They were funneled through the National Institute of Mental Health, the NIMH, a major funding conduit for CIA programs. Many millions more poured into the UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute that West headed. Of course it did.
Yes.
Okay. Of course it did. Including $14 million in federal funds in one fiscal year before he stepped down in 1989.
Wait, how much before he stepped down?
14 million.
Oh, like a going away present almost.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Gary, for your service and your super chat. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, bro.
Yes, you rock. But before stepping down as director of the Neuropsychiatric Institute, West reportedly allowed psychiatric treatments that were more suited to brainwashing, mind control, or a torture chamber than for resolving mental troubles. It was reported in 1976 that the Neuropsychiatric Institute psychiatrist Ivar Lovaas, I love ass too, had used electric cattle prods for aversion therapy on children. Well, yeah, of course that's going to work. If you have a child, a 5-year-old child, say, and you say, hey, 5-year-old child, little Tommy, don't go near that window. Stay away from that window. Don't touch it. And little Tommy goes over to touch the window, and you take a cattle prod and you shove it in his back, and you shock the shit out of him. And then little Tommy's going to get the picture real quick, as anybody would. Don't go back near that window, or you're going to get the cattle prod again. Why is this even a test? You know what the result's going to be, unless little Tommy is special and can't put 2 and 2 together. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to get much deviation from that.
No.
From the normal control.
One newspaper stated at the time, Farrell Instruments Company, the same firm which supplies other shocking equipment for UCLA's, quote, Clockwork Orange experiments on 3 to 12-year-old boys, recognizes that aversion therapy techniques are often cruel. No shit. An example, the company says, is the use of cattle prods, which have high voltage that produces skin destruction. Not just irritation, but destruction. Dr. Lovaas and his partner, Dr. George Recker, however, favor the use of and have used cattle prods on children who are not mentally ill or criminal or who have not violated any law or rule. Young boys merely thought to be effeminate. So they're going to shock you straight, Joe. Every time you think about that other boy, you're going to get the cattle prod, son. Ooh.
Guess they didn't continue with that research, huh?
Lovaas, hired by Jolyon West, also allegedly shocked 5-year-old twins to modify their behavior with jolts administered through a grid system on the floor that enabled the psychiatrist to blast the children whenever they moved somewhere in the room they were not supposed to. I mean, this is like shit you do on mice. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And they're doing this to small children. This is insane. Yeah. Despite the violence that marked the work of West and his cohorts, or perhaps because of it, he enjoyed influence in the psychiatric community, serving, for example, on the National Advisory Council to the NIMH, the National Institute for Mental Health. From his positions, he could have charted a far more humane and helpful course for mental health rather than brain-damaging drugs and physically harming electric shocks. As part of his legacy, the National Institute on Mental Health continues to squander billions in taxpayer dollars to fund research on brain-damaging substances rather than genuine cures. The true cost, impossible to measure in money, lies in the Americans now dead from psychiatric drugs and electric shock therapy, or still living, existing as little more than vegetables. So, crazy stuff. Now, an interesting thing that they were trying to do, Joe, and I believe this is, when I say they, the CIA, that Jolly West could help them create couriers who could carry a long and complex message embedded secretly in their minds somewhere to be retrieved at the end, at the end station.
Right.
So say, you're over here at Rob's house and I want to get a message to Erica. All right. But I don't want you to know what I want to tell her.
You dose me, you tell me.
I dose you, I hypnotize you, whatever I do, I plant the message in there and I let Erica know, hey, look, when Joe gets there, clap 3 times and punch him in the nuts, and he was going to give you a message. And he won't remember giving it to you. So there's human couriers.
Yes.
To, or if you have secret information that you wanted to transfer from person to person that's too sensitive to, go over the phone lines or the telex or whatever.
Yeah.
You implant something in somebody's mind and they don't even have to know you did it. And once you get to the other end, that person knows how to retrieve that memory from you and then also erase the fact that, that you just gave them this message.
Right. And do you know how I think they did it, Rob? And this might be in what you're going to say. Repetition. That same message said over and over and over. And I think I read something to what you're reading. And you know what that made me think of?
Huh.
RFK must die.
Right.
No, I'm not joking.
No, I know.
It made me think that. Because didn't he have it written down like a bunch of times?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily a message to be carried somewhere else, but
right, the concept, right?
Thought implanted in somebody's mind.
Exactly. Yes.
That keeps talking and telling them something, but they don't know where it's coming from.
Yes.
And if you hear this in your head over and over and over again, it's going to drive you insane or to the point of doing something about it.
Right. And
not that I believe that Sirhan killed RFK. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. No, but to your point, so Erica would have some way to, when I got to her, get that message out of me.
Yeah. She clapped 3 times and punched you in the nuts.
Hopefully.
And you spit it right out. You go into a trance and you'd be like, Rob told me to tell you. Da, 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 da. And then she would know the right way to get you back out of your trance state and you wouldn't remember anything.
Yeah.
Crazy. So, and of course, he's having these correspondences with Sidney Gottlieb, and then he added in one of his letters, he said, needless to say, the experiments must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field. And to this end, he asked Gottlieb for some sort of carte blanche, Joe.
Carte blanche, Statler. We're hitting all the things.
Who would the guinea pigs be? West listed 4 groups: basic airmen, volunteers, current patients, and, quote, others, possibly including prisoners in the local jails. Only the volunteers would be paid. The others could be unwilling, and though it wasn't spelled out, unwitting. It would be easier to preserve the secrecy if he were, quote, inducing specific mental disorders in people who already exhibited them. This means taking bad people and turning them even worse. Whoa.
Oh, wow.
Somebody's giving out.
Brandon, thank you for gifting 5 memberships. Spook memberships. And Alpha got one, South to West. I got one. I'll have to give one back here. Umbrella Man and Light Katango. So
awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Brandon. You are the man. I'm gonna try to gift one back because I of course don't need it.
I've never seen that before, but that is awesome. So
Oh yeah, no, that's a big thing, and it does it randomly. So obviously, right? They gave one to me. It does it randomly. I've seen it happen on like some of the true crime channels.
awesome.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you.
And let me also interject here, in case for everybody here, if you are a member, even if you're a spook, you can go back and watch Wednesday night's show. We made it available to every level of membership, from spooks to covert operators to super spies. So even if you're a spook, you can't normally catch our Wednesday show, you can catch this past one. So go back and give it a watch. It was a banger, as they normally all are. And we try to do that the last Wednesday of the month. We make it available for all members, just as a thank you, and to see what you're missing the other 3 Wednesdays of the year, or of the month. Yes. So yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You know what I'm gonna do?
What are you gonna do, Joe?
Let's see if this works. Oh wait. Whoops. Just continue. I'm gonna let it be a surprise.
Okay.
Sorry.
So yeah, he was. That we were talking about who the guinea pigs were going to be. Certain patients requiring hypnosis and therapy and suffering from dissociative disorders, trances, fugue states, amnesias might lend themselves to our experiments. Official investigations in MKUltra yielded little information about its subjects, but West's letter suggests that the program cast a very wide net. And it wasn't just going on here in the United States either. I believe there were some Canadian psychiatrists as well, and probably people around the world.
Montreal and McGill University specifically, I believe.
Yeah. All right, so we got through that. We got through that. Dean of Oklahoma Medical Center. We got through that. Okay, so Jolyon West was an officer in the United States Air Force Medical Service from 1948 to 56, attaining the rank of major, and while assigned to Lackland Air Force Base after his residency, he was appointed to a panel to discover why 36 of 59 airmen captured in the Korean War had confessed or cooperated with North Korean allegations of war crimes committed by the United States. Amid speculation that the airmen had been brainwashed or drugged, West came to a simpler conclusion. What we found enabled us to rule out drugs, hypnosis, and other mysterious trickery. He observed there was just one device used to confuse, bewilder, and torment our men until they were ready to confess to anything. And that device was prolonged chronic loss of sleep. The airmen avoided being court-martialed for these events as a result of Jolyon West's research. Interesting. He completed his residency in psychiatry at Cornell University. In psychiatry, and it was an MKUltra institution and the site of the Human Ecology Fund. He later became a subtractor for MKUltra Subproject 43 and the recipient of a $21,000 grant by the CIA while he was chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oklahoma. So this was, early 60s, late 50s. The proposal submitted by West was entitled Psychophysiological Studies of Hypnosis and Suggestibility, with an accompanying document titled Studies of Dissociative States. We already talked about the elephant. Yes. We already talked about San Francisco crash pad. right. Let's talk, Joe, a little bit about Jack Ruby.
Yes. Let's
Okay. So I have here the report of the examination of Jack Ruby done by Jolyon West in April of 1964, April 26th to be exact. And we're going to go through it for sure. Now, in watching this documentary on Netflix, this chaos documentary, they didn't go into specifics, but they alluded that in the time since he published his book, Chaos, and the time of this documentary, they have come across more documentation that brings Jolly West to Dallas as early as November 29th, 1963. Okay, this is 5 days after Oswald's shot by Ruby, which is relatively quickly and it hasn't been known before recently. But in this April 26th report, we're gonna go through some things here. He's talking about on the way down to visit with Ruby. He was going through previously reported examinations of Ruby by other specialists, but was unable to read them until earlier today on the airplane ride to Dallas. Tonight, my own findings make it clear that there has been an acute change in the patient's condition since these earlier studies were carried out. Upon arriving at the jail this afternoon, I met Sheriff Bill Decker, who informed me that last night after midnight, Mr. Ruby had tricked his guard into stepping out to get him a glass of water, and then had run and struck his head against a wall. It's not clear whether or how long the prisoner was unconscious, according to the sheriff. Mr. Ruby had subsequently been taken to the hospital where a physician examined him, including x-rays of the skull, and stated that he was without serious injury. So Ruby apparently had ran into the wall so hard, he knocked himself out. I mean, you gotta hit the wall pretty good.
Yeah. Almost at like as fast of a running speed as you can within a cell.
Right. But like I said, they examined him, x-rayed him without serious injury. It was also said that Mr. Ruby had been caught stripping out of the lining of his prison garb, apparently to fashion a noose for himself. So he was taking the lining out of his prison jumpsuit and then squirreling it away and fashioning a noose to supposedly hang himself. Psychiatric examination. This examination was undertaken in a private interview room. Ruby appeared pale, tremulous, agitated, and depressed. Said to be usually meticulous in his appearance, he now was more disheveled and unkempt as he had ever appeared before. He stared fixedly at me with an expression of suspicion. His pupils were markedly dilated. There was a large... Huh?
That's a sign that you're dosed.
That is a sign. That is a sign.
Mm-hmm.
There was a large abrasion on the top of his head. An area on the left cheek appeared swollen and reddened. At first, he was unwilling to be left alone with me and seemed to anticipate some terrible news or fearful event. However, it was possible gradually over the course of an hour to obtain a reasonable sample of the patient's mental content. This can be summarized as follows. Last night, the patient became convinced that all the Jews in America were being slaughtered. This is in retaliation against him, Jack Ruby, the Jew who was responsible for, quote, all the trouble. Somehow, through an awful mistake and the distortion of misunderstandings derived from his murder trial, the president's assassination and its aftermath were now being blamed on him and him alone. Thus, he himself was now also the cause of the massacre of 25 million innocent people. He had seen his own brother tortured, mutilated, castrated, and burned in the street outside the jail. He could still hear the scream. He had seen and heard many other similar horrors. The orders for this terrible pogrom must have come from Washington to permit the police to carry out the mass murders without federal troops being called out or involved. Attempts to persuade the patient that these beliefs were incorrect or the symptoms of mental illness aroused his anger. He became more suspicious of my sincerity and once or twice seemed about to attack me. He repeatedly intimated that he was being mocked or conned by me, since I must know all about the things he was telling me. Don't tell me you don't know about it. Everybody must know about it. He kept repeating that after what happened last night, there was nothing more in life for him. He had smashed his head against the wall in order to put an end to it. Whether it was the genocide raging across the land or his own personal torment that could be thus terminated was not clear. Attempts to discuss addiction, psychiatric examinations, or the pending hearings, or his prospective appeal or a new trial were fruitless. He felt that talk of a new trial was just a mockery after what happened last night, and that he would be rotten and despicable to want to survive or be saved after having caused a great people with a history of 4,000 years to be wiped out in a night. I persuaded the patient to let me invite Dr. David Candish, one of his attorneys, to step in the room and then watch the two talk something for a while. As the lawyer continued to describe motions for the appeal, Mr. Ruby became increasingly agitated and clearly paranoid as it dawned on him that Mr. Candish, whom he had trusted, was now, quote, pretending not to know what happened last night to all the Jews. Attempts to carry out many of the more formal aspects of a mental status examination were now impossible. The patient was oriented in place and person, but perhaps not for time. He was non-responsive to many inquiries. Concentration was poor. Associations and continuity of thought were disrupted. Some material pertinent to his shooting of Oswald was elicited, but is not included in this report. That's a little sus.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, Mr. Ruby was obviously psychotic. He is completely preoccupied with his delusions of persecution on his account. He feels helpless, worthless, and guilty because he is to blame for the mass murders of his own people. The experiences of last night are not grossly delusional, but include auditory and visual hallucinations as well. His emotions are abnormal. Feelings of anxiety, depression, guilt, suspiciousness, and despair are expressed in various proportions. Often the effect is inappropriate to the ideas accompanying them. Diagnostic impression, acute psychotic reaction, paranoid state manifested by delusions, visual and auditory hallucinations, suspiciousness, agitation, inappropriate affect, unshakable fixed preoccupations, depression, suicidal impulses, and impairment of reasoning, judgment, concentration, and progression of thought, etiology. Not fully determined, the stress of the patient's recent life situation is undoubtedly an important factor. Other contributing factors, including organic brain disease, chronic or acute, should be explored. Prognosis for the present acute psychotic reactions fair if proper treatment is promptly instituted. Recommendation: immediate psychiatric hospitalization, study and treatment, close observation, suicidal precautions. So obviously, it sounds to me, Joe, that in a quite timely fashion, somebody dosed the shit out of Jack Ruby the night before Jolyon West shows up there to evaluate him. And this could be in direct response to a ploy by his attorneys for a retrial or appeal, on grounds that he is mentally unstable, criminally insane, or whatever, I'm sure he would rather be found not guilty by reason of insanity, or at least be put in a psychiatric hospital rather than jail, with the opportunity to possibly be treated and released in a couple years. This all smells to me to a ploy, because as we know, Melvin Belli was became one of his attorneys. I believe he was recommended by Tom Howard, one of Jack Ruby's early lawyers. And I believe he was likely consulted or brought in early, on the deal. And Melvin Belli was from San Francisco.
Yes, he was.
California, of all places.
Yes, he was.
He was also he got very tangled up in the Zodiac murders.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he famously got a alleged phone call from the Zodiac killer and a Christmas card or something, I believe, from the Zodiac killer. And he may have been on the television show when he got allegedly the Zodiac called in and was talking to Belli. So again, all this stuff is crazy, right? All these crazy connections.
It's crazy. So,
LSD, Programmed to Kill, Haight Ashbury, you know what I mean? Like Manson, Zodiac,
Yeah. So, no, for sure. So, just to put the timeline back into perspective, Jolyon West, as you alluded to, had some as close as 5 days after the assassination, or I guess his assassination or murder of Lee Harvey Oswald on the 29th, when his first alleged involvement in Jack Ruby's mental status came when he started convening this panel to start to, give some type of consensus medical panel, right? Of course, they're all spooks, to weigh in on this, right? But his actual visit to Jack Ruby in Dallas jail was late April, right? The 26th, I believe.
Yeah.
Jack Ruby testifies to the Warren Commission in Dallas June 7th, I believe. So essentially, the way I look at this is, if you don't want anything not above board to come out, you can't exactly predict what Jack Ruby's going to say. And, Chief Justice Warren is down there, a bunch of other people in the Warren Commission. How do you make him seem crazy? Well, you dose the shit out of him.
Right. You have him discovered knocking himself out in the jail cell, describing these horrific events that can't possibly be happening, that he's hallucinating.
Yeah. Hiding under the bed.
You bring in one of the foremost experts in psychiatry, Jolyon West, to examine him at this point and determine that he is nutso crazy. It is interesting that Ruby's pupils were extremely dilated. That's a dead giveaway to somebody who's tripping balls.
Yeah. Do you want to know a funny story about that, Rob? A few years ago, I got pulled over, and the cop goes, "Your pupils are like ridiculous. Like, I've never seen pupils that big. Like, you're high." And I was trying to tell him, like, Nah, back in the day, I went to music festivals. Like it's not like now, like I was trying to like say it like subtly. He didn't believe it. He ended up giving me a bunch of tests and let me go. But and I wasn't dosing, of course. But it was funny because yes, that made me think of that. When your pupils are like almost to the color of your eye, that's a dead giveaway. Yeah.
Yeah. For shizzy.
So yeah, and it brings you back to what we talked about earlier with the shaver guy and how Jolly West comes into his trial, and that might have been more cover up. This might have been more cover up for a different reason. I think they were covering up Shaver's possibly unwitting.
Yeah, and see the thing is with the Jack Ruby thing. Okay, this is April of '64, right?
Yeah, almost May. Yeah,
And I believe, didn't Jack Ruby die in like '65 or '66?
65 or 66. Yeah,
Before his retrial was going to start.
yes.
Now
Yeah.
he wasn't. They didn't. I'm wondering why they didn't follow up on West's recommendations to have him institutionalized and treated in a mental institution. I mean, if this is the recommendation of a doctor, why didn't they follow up on it? I mean, there's got to be a reason.
I think this is my thought. If Jack Ruby was some normal, hey, thank you so much. We appreciate that. If Jack Ruby was some normal guy that committed murder, they probably would have let Jolyon West do that, because I think the reason he wanted to do that was probably to continue observing for his experiments, right?
Or
But
you
in
figure
terms
it
of
would be the groundwork for an appeal or a retrial to have him be considered insane. But I think here's the problem, Joe. I think the reason they didn't continue on this path is because Ruby's hallucinations were way off the charts. And they would have had to keep him like this constantly because, when you trip, you come down and you go back to normal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, you might go on a bad trip. You might have been dosed and you didn't know it. That's probably a scenario, which is causing all of these things that are in the back of your mind that you think about to come forward, in your hallucinatory state and your tripping state and freak you the fuck out. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I can hear my brother dying in the street, just, crazy stuff. But then of course, you come down after that.
Yeah. No, very possible. Or the other reason could be he was just way too high profile of a person at that point.
Or high strung.
I'm sorry?
And high strung.
Yes. He might have not been in their
but also one key part of that too, Joe, is that he mentions that Ruby talked about why he shot Oswald, but he's not going to put it in this report. So maybe in this state, West was able to get the truth out of him. And that's why things didn't progress after this.
Huh.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I didn't think of that.
Because while West has this guy one-on-one in a room, he can hypnotize him to do or say anything pretty much he wants.
Yeah.
Or suppress memories.
Yeah, that's exactly what they had reported being successful a decade earlier. Or somewhat successful.
Yeah.
It's very possible, man. I just know they didn't want whatever Ruby actually knew and who actually told him to take out Oswald, because I do believe he was instructed to do that.
Yeah.
As we said before, I don't think they wanted that truth coming out in front of Warren or anyone or at a retrial or whenever.
Yeah.
So.
Very crazy stuff. So some of the other stuff other questionable things that Mr. West was involved in here was the case that you ever heard about Lance Renzel, Joe?
I've not.
Okay. Well, Lance Renzel was a NFL running back and University of Oklahoma alumni. He was arrested twice in 66 and 70 for indecent exposure to young girls. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
West's family had been acquainted with Renzel's family during their time at the university, noting that it was most unusual for a psychiatrist to permit his relationship with a patient to become public knowledge. West acknowledged that Renzel, quote, had many injuries, including a number of severe concussions, presaging contemporary medicine's greater understanding of chronic traumatic brain, whatever, encephalopathy, encephalopathy. Say that 3 times fast.
Hey,
Among American football players.
Hey, there's a lot of L's in there, bro. So
Yeah, otherwise known as CTE, folks. Maybe you've heard of that.
Yeah.
No wonder they don't say the whole goddamn word. All right. He also asserted that he was required to make periodic reports of Renzel's progress to several public and private agencies. As a friend of Hugh Hefner, Renzel went on to reside at the Playboy Mansion in the late 70s. In his 2022 memoir, former mansion butler Stefan Tettenbaum wrote that he saw Renzel masturbate in front of the monkeys at the mansion zoo, and alleged that Hefner thought Lance could be cured by allowing him to be free to explore himself sexually. So Lance constantly walked and ran about the mansion grounds with his penis hanging out of his shorts. We were instructed not to pay attention to his public masturbation and just pretend like it was not happening. It is not known if Renzel was domiciled at the Playboy Mansion through the intersection of West.
The monkeys got it for me.
I mean, you've got Playboy Playmates there, and you're jacking off in front of the Playboy Primates at the Mansion Zoo, walking around with your dick hanging out all day long, and all the staff being instructed to just overlook it.
Oh, God. That is so funny.
In 1976, we have the Patty Hearst trial, Joe. West was appointed by the court in his capacity as a brainwashing expert and worked without a fee, pro bono, believing that Hearst displayed all the classic signs of coercion, brainwashing, and the Stockholm effect. West wrote a newspaper article after the trial asking President Carter to release Patty Hearst from prison. Some weeks after her arrest, Hearst repudiated her SLA allegiance. That's the Lebanese army, whatever the hell that is. According to West, Scientologists attempted to discredit him and get him fired using methods similar to those used in Operation Freakout. Now, I don't know what Operation Freakout is, but it sounds like a fun operation.
It sounds like a sub-project of MKUltra in some
Yeah.
way.
Let's dose people to the gills and just see what happens. This was allegedly done after his contributions to a 1980 textbook that classified Scientology as a cult. West participated in an American Psychiatric Association panel on cults. Each speaker had received a letter threatening a lawsuit if Scientology was mentioned. Apparently, others were intimidated, and only West, the last speaker, referred to the letter and the cult by saying, "I read parts of the letter to the 1,000 plus psychiatrists and then told any Scientologists in the crowd to pay attention. I said I would like to advise my colleagues that I consider Scientology a cult and L. Ron Hubbard a quack and a fake. I wasn't about to let them intimidate me. Unquote.
Ooh, interesting.
Oh, Jolly got balls. Jolly got
Yeah.
balls.
He didn't like competition in the cult space.
In late 1999, Jolyon West died peacefully. Well, I don't know how peacefully, but at his home in Los Angeles at age 74. His family said the cause of death was metastatic brain cancer. However, West's son, John, would later assert in a 2009 memoir that he helped his father end his life at the latter's choice by using prescription medication due to the terminal illness. Wouldn't it be fitting if he had just dosed himself to death?
Who did that? Who did that? Didn't someone do that we talked about?
What, dose himself to death?
Yeah. On like his deathbed or hospice or something? Or am I making this up?
No, I remember hearing about it. I don't know. I think we were talking about, wouldn't it be crazy if you were tripping?
Oh, yeah, we did. That's what it was.
Like, that would suck.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, Lee's asking, all this talk of LSD, do we think that LHO was part of the same testing? We don't know. I mean, we have no proof of it. We do know that LSD was in Atsugi and Manila, and that they weren't avert to testing on enlisted officers or, enlisted people without their knowledge. So who knows? I mean, I wasn't nothing past them.
Yeah, let me say this, Rob. If you are of the belief that Lee Harvey Oswald was sent as a true false defector by the CIA to Russia, that argument holds more weight with me, that they might have tested him for anti-interrogation techniques type of thing.
Right.
If you take the maybe Larry Hancock, Oswald puzzle, maybe unwitting most of his decision to go to Russia, I wouldn't say so. I say it's more of a coincidence he was in those two spots. That's what I have to say about that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm not saying one way or the other.
Aldous Huxley's wife dosed him on his deathbed.
That was it, right? Or no?
Yeah, and Oswald was reading a lot of these books, like Brave New World. Aldous Huxley wrote, The Doors of Perception.
It was, yes. And he died the same day as
Kennedy.
As Kennedy, right?
Yeah,
that's where it was from. I knew we had talked about
all of these crazy coincidences. All right,
Erica,
anything else to follow up with?
Yeah, Erica, if I'm on my deathbed, will you dose me to death? She goes, I have one more thing. And
she slowly reaches for the pillow.
Yeah. And we promised, this is the ultimate weave here, Rob. We promised we'd get back to George Hunter White.
Yes.
And he was an American federal agent. This is just a basic thing from Wikipedia. He was Federal Bureau of Narcotics, FBN investigator, and then undercover CIA operative. He was a World War II veteran and one of the men responsible for the capture of Lucky Luciano. Interesting.
Wow.
But yeah, I didn't know that. But what makes this interesting is that, let's see if I can get the right thing up here. So he was kind of observing the MKUltra sub-project of Operation Midnight Climax. And I'm just going to read one thing real quick on that.
Paul became a spook. Welcome in.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Operation Midnight Climax was an operation carried out by the CIA as a sub-project of Project MKUltra. the mind control research program that began in the 1950s. It was established by George Hunter White under the pseudonym of Morgan Hall. Let's see. So essentially, Operation Midnight Climax was the honey trap operation in San Francisco. So while you had the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic that was, giving out some stuff, you had another clinic that was, or you had an operation where you were procuring women to random johns and then dosing them and then observing them during that process. Poor Johns. And George Hunter White was the CIA undercover operative that was hiding behind the glass, right? So they had like in those interrogation rooms, the two-way glass or the one-way glass where.
Yeah.
So there were George White was on the other side of this with other people laughing. And he himself was taking part of LSD and taking advantage of the women. And there's actually an interview with him out there. I didn't want to play it to get us possibly demonetized. But so I figured I'd just do a little search into Mary Farrell and figure out what I could figure out about this Scafuza George White. And I came across a transcript of HSCA Critics Conference, September 17th, 1977. And Rob, to be honest, I didn't know they had a HSCA Critic Conference. But I
recognize a lot of those names on there.
That's what I'm saying. It's some big names. J. Gary Shaw, Peter Dale Scott, Josiah Thompson, Mary Farrell, Larry Harris, Paul Hawk, Kathy Kinsella, Jim Kustman, and Sylvia Marr. So I continue to search, and this is what I find out. Scott is speaking here. Peter Dale Scott. I had to go up to the top to figure out who Scott was. I was like, who the hell is Scott? So he's talking about George White. He's talking about some other guy who represented Ruby before the Kefauver Committee. Thank you, sir. Which was very interested in the Reagan killing. Is a very plausible assumption, particularly when you go back to the Chicago Tribune in 1946 and see that right after the Reagan was shot, George White, who was then head of the local Federal Bureau of Narcotics, again, going back to the Wikipedia, FBN, we know this is the same George White, office, held a press conference in which he said the FBI was very interested in that case. Ruby was an informant in 1946 for the FBI, and George White was the head of that local office. You'll have to remember that George White went on to become the top organized crime consultant for the Kefauver Committee. So, Ruby is an informant to this committee, and George White, someone later involved in the MKUltra sub-project in San Francisco with procuring women for random people and dosing them, had possible contact with Ruby. So that made it very interesting to me that later Ruby would also be caught up in another MKUltra type situation here, right? Really, it probably is a coincidence, but it's fascinating nonetheless. That back in 46, this dude White probably knew who Ruby was, might have ran him as an informant, and less than 2 decades later, his fellow MKUltra colleagues were dealing with Ruby in a different way. So that is crazy, huh?
That is crazy.
No.
What's even crazier is what I'm trying to find right here, Joe. This might take me a minute, so if you could just run a little interference, interact with some folks.
I'm looking at a couple comments. Yeah, Midnight Climax, Sally. Yeah, that's do a little Googling on that. That's funny. And George White was like kind of the main guy in terms of Midnight Climax. So just crazy the how it all comes around. Oh yeah, I forgot about that episode, Colleen. Jack Ruby be tripping.
Yeah.
Was that was with me, right? I don't know if that's the exact name of the episode, but
I don't know. It's
if
possible.
if that's the exact name of the episode, it was BJ. But imagine getting dosed by a hooker. Yeah, that wouldn't be fun. And they did it through aerosol in the bathroom and the drinks. I was reading. So, and that was happening also in San Francisco at the same time. Yeah, I guess probably.
I thought of a funner way to dose some guy without his knowledge, but that might that would require the prostitute being dosed as well.
Right, especially if it's aerosol. Are these new documents, Joe? No, most of these are old. There is one new document I came across on Silly Gottlieb, or I say I came across on Twitter. Someone else came across. It's not super. It has a bunch of redactions, which is kind of interesting, but it's not anything different than what we've been saying. But we figured we'd because there's all this talk, and we've talked about new documents. We figured we'd do a little funner episode tonight, and then get back to the documents. Maybe next week. We did some on Wednesday, so
yeah, we're documenting it out.
Sally with the comment of the night. Scott Edwards, step up. Dare I Google Midnight Climax? Might take me to all sorts, Joe. You never know what corner of the internet Googling Midnight Climax might take you, Sally. So Google at your own risk. For sure.
Sounds like a fun one. But for more reading, and I was looking for something that I know that I've seen. H.P. Albarelli's book, Hank Albarelli's book, it's called A Terrible Mistake: The Murder of Frank Olson and the CIA's Secret Cold War Experiments. If you're looking for a good book to read, more that goes more in depth into this stuff than we've been able to go over here, I would recommend checking that book out. And the reason that I bring this up is because in this book, he goes very in depth into George Hunter White and a association with a fella by the name of Pierre Lafitte, who had an alias in New Orleans as Jean Martin.
Croissant.
So very interesting there.
Yes, and he had a J. Martin alias as well, Rob.
Yep, and that was released in the newer book Coup in Dallas by H.P. Albarelli. But he was mentioned first in A Terrible Mistake 20 years ago. The book came out in 2005. This Pierre Lafitte dude was mentioned in the book as being associated with George Hunter White.
Huh.
Yeah. So
I had no idea about the connection.
No, and apparently Turn Horse says the show Wormwood is about Frank Olson stuff. And no, I've never watched Wormwood, but I think I need to. Hopefully it's somewhere that I subscribe to.
Yeah.
Where can we find it, folks? Wormwood. Mm-hmm. Is it streaming anywhere? Or do I have to order the DVD off Amazon? The entire series.
You still do DVDs?
Well, if you can't stream it anywhere.
Sure.
I do have a DVD player.
Yeah. I lost mine a long time ago. Or are you saying you have a DVD player? Erica just raised her hand behind the laptop. Said, I have a DVD player. Yes. You old people. Finger. I just got the finger. Yeah. So in terms of the JFK assassination, to kind of wrap it up, if there was any involvement in MKUltra, I would definitely side on the safe side and say it definitely had to do with Jolyon West and Jack Ruby. The other events we talked about, whether it be the Frank Olson or the Carver, or there were kind of other operations, but I think that's the one you could tie the best to the JFK assassination would be Jolyon's West, and almost immediate, and then further involvement in later April, about a month before he testified to the Warren Commission. That checks the boxes for me, man. I don't think he was there randomly. That's for sure.
No, I think it was part of some kind of a plan to make Jack Ruby seem crazy,
like a bumbling idiot.
Lawyers.
Yeah, bumbling idiot. Yeah, and you talked about Belli being from San Francisco. A lot of the lawyers Jack had might not have acted in his best interest, and I think he had a whole team of them. He had like 3 or 4, right?
Yeah. Now I realize, folks, that at this time in 1964, Jolyon West was still at the University of Oklahoma. He had not made his way to California yet. So it's hard to make these direct ties, but these associations can be made. It could be at this point when Melvin Belli was introduced to Jolyon West, and then once he became out to California, could have gotten wrapped up in some other stuff in between LA and San Francisco, and he would have known Belli at the time. And he came into contact with Charles Manson, and he was in LA as well, where Manson went after leaving San Francisco. So these things are crazy, Joseph. Crazy.
It's a small world when you get into all these people. It wouldn't surprise me at all in the least if they had known each other in some way. Just doesn't matter where you were, you're still fly back and forth.
Yeah, these things could be intertwined at the weirdest places, But this is just an example of the kind of things that our CIA was doing behind our backs and funding autonomously.
No. And it was a mistake that we found it, really.
I mean, if it weren't for
the committees of the 70s,
that and if he hadn't left all those papers to that library in California, I mean, you'd never have hard concrete proof that he worked for the CIA, and now we do.
Yeah.
You can suspect it all day long, but to prove it in his own words and letters and actions is a whole different thing, and that's awesome.
Right.
That's awesome.
And we know West visited Ruby, right? He had signed on some of the slips. Like, we know that. That's not speculation.
We have the report.
We know Jack Ruby went crazy shortly before or just around the time that West came. We know.
It was the night before West came.
Yes.
Not a coincidence, folks.
No. Yeah. And I think Jack was a pretty level-headed guy for the most part. I mean, of course, he lost the school. He, did different things, of course. But
he was a weirdo.
He was a weirdo, but he wasn't batshit crazy.
No. And you know what I saw too recently? I think it was in the new files. That Jack Ruby was seeing a doctor weekly to receive cranial injections to reverse his balding.
Before or after incarceration?
Before.
Okay.
Yeah, like the year before, he started going to see a doctor who was injecting some snake oil shit into his head to reverse the effects of balding. Basically start regrowing hair.
Well, Rob, to be fair, my brother does that.
Yeah, but this ain't 1963, bro.
Right.
Where likely that shit was snake oil back then.
Yeah.
I don't know when they invented, Rogaine or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to go see a doctor and get it. Your head hurts. It's terrible. He's like, it's the worst, but it works for him. But yeah, that is 60 years ago plus. So
Yeah. I don't know how legit that is, but that's another way he could have been compromised. Over time, if you're injecting something straight into somebody's head, there's a lot of nerves and,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, your brain is right there, bro.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure Jack, obviously being a fighter, was he a boxer back in the day? He probably took a few cranial shots. You know what I mean? And when you think of, and I think that's kind of what the type of people they focused on, because they say subjects that this is right for. I'm losing the exact wording, but it was a certain type of people that this worked the best on. And think of Sirhan, who fell off the horse and hit his head, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that type of thing. So
yeah, it's
fascinating.
And just to end the show off on a different note, but somewhat related, came across some recently, I don't know if they're recent, but they're recently discovered classified documents from the CIA regarding Operation Sunstreak. Joe, are you familiar with that?
I am not.
I believe it was either a precursor or to the Stargate program, remote viewing.
Oh, okay.
So I have here, let me pop it up here, a remote viewing session summary. Target is a container. This container has another container inside of it. The target is fashioned of wood, gold, and silver. The target is similar in shape to a AOL, whatever that is, a coffin, and is decorated with seraphim. See sketch page 161. So what does that sound like to you, Joe? Okay, you don't know. This target is located somewhere in the Middle East, as the language spoken by individuals present seemed to be Arabic. Visuals of surrounding buildings indicated the presence of mosque domes. Individuals in the area were clothed in virtually all white, had black hair, dark eyes. One figure I homed in on wore a mustache. The target is hidden underground, dark and wet, were all aspects of the location of the target. The purpose of the target is to bring a people together. It has something to do with ceremony, memory, homage, the resurrection. There is an account or aspect of spirituality, information, lessons, and historical knowledge far beyond what we know now. The target is protected by entities and can only be opened by those who are authorized to do so. This container cannot be opened until the time is deemed correct. Once it is time to open the container, the mechanics of the lock system will be found to be fairly simple. Individuals opening the container by prying or striking are destroyed by the container's protectors through the use of a power unknown to us.
Oh, I think I got it, but I think Bungle got it first.
Yeah. And so the training target number 0209 is the Ark of the Covenant. Access and describe the target identified by coordinate, whatever. So the remote viewer is only given, they're not told what they're going to look at. They're given coordinates.
Right.
Now, the training target, they say, is the Ark of the Covenant. Viewer attained excellent sight contact, doing very well with stage 4 structure. Viewer also exhibits the ability to keep AOL to a minimum. Have to be careful with editing, though. This does not seem to be a problem at this time, just something to watch for. Evaluation 4, classified by the DIA. And this is Project Sunstreak. Again, December of 1988. Wow. So the CIA seems to know where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden, which is beneath the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, somewhere buried deep underneath of it.
Whoa.
Allegedly. Is it or not?
I heard it was in Mar-a-Lago. Did you hear he has a big replica?
Pretty sweet copy of it, yeah.
I also heard them doing remote viewing into the pyramids too.
They've even remote viewed to Mars as well.
Into Mars too, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Even
and
like
they've been doing that
years ago on Mars.
Yeah.
Or like 5 million years ago when people were there or whatever was there.
Yeah. And I think CIA has been doing that since the 70s, right? So yeah, I know that document you said is from the late 80s, but yeah, it's crazy.
Yes,
right?
Timothy, the rabbit hole tinfoil alert.
Yes. We saved it for the end.
Yes, south to west, or no, Lee. The Templars took it, and they took it to Oak Island, and that's where it's buried. Are they going to find it at Oak Island, the Curse of Oak Island? We'll see.
They already did all those digging.
They did.
Yeah, those digs.
See, Colleen knows. It's on Oak Island. See?
South to west. Cue Indiana Jones theme. Oh, I did the wrong one. Yeah.
Oh.
That is a great movie.
Yeah. Well, this was a fun episode, Joe. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah,
we needed a little break from the documents.
We do. Yeah.
For sure. So we hope everybody enjoyed it. Seemed like they did. We had quite an audience here all night, so that is good.
Yeah. Hope we learned something. Yeah. I definitely did in preparing for this, for sure.
Absolutely. So, Joe, without further ado,
right, let me do the Ruby. Let me do the Ruby cam.
Ruby, come on. Come here, girl. Ruby, you want to dance? Come on. Come on.
Come on. Come on.
Come on.
Yeah, come here.
Now let's see if the music will play tonight. It did not want to play Wednesday night.
Yes. And we have special guests next week. And if you are a member, you will find out on Wednesday.
That's right. Allegedly. Thank you, everybody, for showing up, going out, and hanging out with us. Thank you to all those who support the show. And if you'd like to become a member, the link is in the description to make it real easy for you. Make sure you check it out. And if you're a spook, you can watch last Wednesday's show.
Crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case. Good night.
Barry almost died at the beginning of the show. Made a miraculous comeback. I think Jolyon West dosed me before the show. Well, that was one hell of a bong hit. See y'all.